Your life can be full of inspiration and magic, and you don't need glass slippers to get there. Welcome to the podcast for real life heroines with author, speaker, and coach, Susanna Liller. Join us as we work with key elements of personal development to assist you in hearing the calls that life has for you. Be inspired, be empowered, and be encouraged. Let's start today's episode with your host, Susanna Liller.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to my podcast, the podcast for real life heroines. And today I am more than excited to be talking with Colleen Garrick. And Colleen and I have had a conversation, and I know you're going to be so amazed with her story. And I want to just give a shout out to David Lee, my friend from Heart at Work, because he introduced me to Colleen. He is a storyteller, and he knows that I collect heroines' journey stories. And he said, Susanna, you need to talk to Colleen. She has such an amazing story, and she is a heroine. So yeah, David, you were right. And so what is this thing called the heroine's journey? Let me just review that for those of you who maybe haven't been introduced to it before. And of course, it was always known as the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell, teacher, writer, introduced it, brought it into the popular culture, particularly with Bill Moyers. They did a PBS series called The Power of Myth. And it's about a person. Of course, it's always been in literature, but what I do in talking to these real life women, I show how it's reflected in our real lives, right? So, but it's a person who starts off in normal everyday life, and they're kind of ordinary, just like everybody else. Not that anyone's ordinary, but you're just going about life. And then something happens to take you out of that normal life into, we call it in journey language, on the road to adventure, or into the unknown. And you go on a heroine's or hero's journey. And that thing that happens, we call it the call. And it can come very subtly and kind of tap you on the shoulder, or it can be a whoa, big bam that says, holy mackerel. And it might be internal, coming from inside you, like, oh, I think I really want to do something different. Or it can come from outside and sort of, again, pull the rug out from under your feet. But then how does the heroine react to the call? And that's the whole thing. I mean, how you respond to that call. If you do go on that journey, then yeah, you're on the heroine's journey. But you might decide, no, I don't want to really leave right now. And you might call that area your comfort zone, which is okay. Timing is everything for everybody. But Colleen and I talked about this, and you're going to hear about it in her story. But usually it gets louder and louder and louder if you ignore it. And then it's like the wake-up call. So Colleen, welcome. Thank you for doing this with me today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I'd also like to say thank you to David, who's just been so remarkable in my, professional development, and also just really opening some doors for me personally. So thank you, David. And thank you, Susanna, for having me.
You are welcome. Yeah, David is a good guy for sure. And he's helped connect me to other heroines too. So he's a heroine connector. So Colleen, we have been over what the heroine's journey is, and you knew about it anyway. And what sets my podcast apart, because other people collect stories for sure, but I ask people to think about it within that framework of the heroine's journey. So of course, we start there. And I guess I just wonder if you could tell us, what was life like before you got your call? And let's also say, we get many calls in life, right? And we keep getting them. You think that, oh, that's it. I have evolved. I've followed that call, and now bingo, you get another one. But that's because calls and the journey keep evolving us, right? But what was, I know you're going to share a particular call. It was a doozy. But before that, what was your ordinary life like?
My ordinary life was, what one would expect from, I guess, a middle-class family. I was in high school. I was well educated. I went to college. I lived in the city. I got a job. And growing up, I don't know if it was a void or if it was fear or if it was just not really knowing who I was internally, but there was always kind of something that kept me sheltered, I guess. I think it would probably be fear, and I felt there was a void, and so I tried to fill that void with what I thought society thought I should fill it with, whether it be work or condos or education or boyfriends or whatever it may be. And that void kind of never went away. And what I found through the fear is I could subdue the fear with drugs and alcohol. And I could still live what looked like to be a somewhat functional life. I had the education, I had jobs, I had a good group of friends. And eventually, I had several consequences that would be calls throughout my entire life. I've had, run-ins with the law, unfortunately, quite a bit. And so these are like mini calls, I would say, because they weren't very extreme, like my big wake-up call. I frequently got in trouble, but I got away with it. And so that was kind of me ignoring the call, that maybe there was something internally that really I needed to look at. And eventually in 2009, I had a very big call in the...
Before you go there, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking as you relate, I mean, I think it's pretty common that people do find different ways to fill that void, that it is something in our human existence that happens. And it could be being on your phone a lot, or shopping, or any kind of habit that wouldn't be necessarily good for us. And yes, it could get us into trouble. Yeah, okay. So ordinary life. And then, so you had a big call. What happened?
I had a big call on November 17th in 2009. I was in a really dark place. I had a boyfriend who had died from a drug overdose. And eventually this big call came in the form of 10 state police and a DEA agent knocking on my door. And this was the first time where the call was very loud and had very extreme consequences attached to it.
You described to me, so just tell us the scene, because I think you said they came in just like on TV.
Yeah.
Just tell us.
I was at home and I heard a knock on my door, and unfortunately I am familiar with what a cop knock sounds like on the door. So I knew, and I was, again, it was a really dark place for me. I probably weighed 80 pounds. And I opened the door and there were 10 state police with guns held and shields, and a DEA agent saying, "Are you Colleen Garrick?" And I said, "Yes, I am. I think you can put the guns down." And they came into my apartment and handcuffed me to my refrigerator and tore my apartment apart.
Wow. And they did that because they thought you were going to do something, or?
I don't know. They just probably knew that I did have drugs on my property, and maybe they didn't know what else I might have had. So they had to kind of come in with their own protection and just make sure they didn't know who else was in there. They were just doing their due diligence and, not probably recognizing it was just a very small, sick girl.
Right. So what did you do? What happened?
So from there, I was in a place where, my dad had already once tried to help me with my recovery, and I did not really think that a life without drugs and alcohol was one for me. I didn't know what that looked like. My entire life had been around, socializing and drinking and partying. And so, the fear of the unknown there, what does life look like without that? So for me, it just wasn't an option. And so my dad wasn't going to help me. He said, you're on your own this time. And so I was also being evicted from my apartment at the time. And so I didn't want to be homeless. So I figured I had to make a change. And so I got myself into detox. And then from there, I went to a 12-step retreat program. And again, like I went there still really not listening to the call, because there was an internal call that goes along with that very big external call. And I really wasn't listening. And it was mostly due to fear. I was just thinking, okay, I'll do this. I'll make it look good. And then I'll go along my merry way and continue living life the way I was, which was really not sustainable. But
what was the internal call though, Colleen? What looking back, I know you couldn't hear it, but what would you say it was?
For me, the internal call was God. And it was God trying to say, hey, I can help you fill this void without everything else you're trying to fill it with. And I wasn't listening because I just didn't know. You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And, fortunately, I was able to go to this 12-step retreat and sit with people who had lived like I have lived in my active addiction and who had come out on the other side. And they were full of hope and faith and love. And they were happy and they were joyous and they were free, like their minds were free. And sitting with them and listening to their stories and realizing that they had walked a mile in my shoes, I was able to be like, okay, well, if they can have this life, then maybe I can too. And I was able to, work through the 12 steps and really find out who I was. I look at the 12 steps as like kind of a pathway to self, a pathway to God, and a pathway to others. And in the fourth step, you write an inventory. And when I wrote this inventory, I realized that I was not the person I thought I was. I thought my idea was that I was this kind, loving, honest person. And my inventory was very different. My inventory told me that I was dishonest, manipulative, and that I will harm anyone to feel ease and comfort. And I did not like that. I also recognized how full of fear I was. Here's this person who's, got great education and, has had great places to live and is well-traveled and had great jobs. But like, honestly, if anyone really knew the real me, they might not like me. And that fear drove me into some really ugly decision-making. And when I looked at that fear and I looked at the ludicrous things that I did to avoid walking through the fear, which only perpetuated the fear, I was like, whoa, like this is crazy. And then so by looking at that inventory, and then there's a conduct piece as well, and looking at all of that, I really was like, I do not want to be this person. Like, this is not who I thought I was, and it's not someone I want to be. And one thing that I use a lot with my daughter is, when I was a little girl, so, when someone asks you like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And for me, I was like, I want to own the Dallas Cowboys. And, I'm clearly way off track here. But, for me, it's like, had someone said, who do you want to be? Because for me today, what my life is defined by is who I am, not what I do. And
tell us, so in this 12-step program, you were in a detox center.
First, I was in a detox center, and then from the detox, I was in Boston for detox, and then from there, I went to a place in New Hampshire for the 12-step retreat. So I was there as a client for about 30 days, and then I stayed on for about 4 more months after that. So I was there for about a total of 5 months, I think.
And would you say it was hard? I mean, were you, movies and television show us horrible places, horrible scenes of recovery. And it sounds like you were really having kind of an awakening. So was it hard for you, or?
It was very hard.
Yeah.
I was very sick due to the physical withdrawal from the drugs. So I was very, very sick. And then couple that with the mental anguish of your disease and the rabbit hole that your thinking goes into, and you think of all the harm you've done, and you think of so much negative, and it just continues and continues and continues, and you end up in this dark hole where you feel paralyzed. And that is really hard. And then looking at your truths of who I really was versus who I want to be, looking at that is also very, very hard.
And isn't there one of those steps is about forgiving yourself? Yes.
There is a step. I mean, it's not necessarily about forgiving yourself, but there's a promise that comes, there's promises in the 9th step. And it's like, we will not regret the past nor shut the door on it. And that is in the 9th step. So the 9th step is about making amends. And so you go to people and you make amends for how you've wronged them. And, you know, I've made quite a few amends in my day. And what that brought me was really the fact that God is real. Because on my own power, there is no way I would go to somebody and tell them how I had harmed them, you know, the wrong things I had done. And when you do that, and then you let the person have their time to speak or ask questions, most people that I came into contact with were like, Colleen, we love you. It was really hard watching you do what you were doing to yourself. And just realizing, because my disease tells me that everybody's out to get me, the world is against me, and to see that people are really kind and loving and supportive, and that really this negative self-talk is just so harmful. And so for me, going through that period really was refreshing. And so when others forgive you, it's a lot easier to forgive yourself.
Right. You know, when we talked about this, I shared with you that I had been through the steps as an Al-Anon participant, and that I really felt that was the start. Well, I had always been to church, even as a little girl, and had a spiritual background, but I really got on my spiritual path, I believe, when I did those 12 steps as part of Al-Anon. So it sounds like it was equally powerful for you. So, but I know that things continued to shift for you. So tell us more. You're on the road of adventure. That's how you have definitely moved into the unknown. You're not that person drinking and having fun and socializing anymore. You had this huge call. So now what?
So now I have to, you know, atone for my crimes that I committed in my active addiction. So I was in Plymouth, New Hampshire for about 5 months, and then I moved to Portland, Maine, which is how I got here, for sober living. And I was in court for almost 2 years for my charges, which were drug trafficking. I lived in a school zone and conspiracy, and they held 10 years in prison. And due to my recovery, and so that's a huge unknown, like, what does life look like incarcerated? And then, like, I was 34 at the time, and I'm like, 10 years, I'm going to get out and be 44. Like, am I going to get married? Am I going to have children? Like, all of this crazy unknown. And I just kept doing the right thing. Like, a lot of people are like, wow, you know, if that were me, I would just be like, screw it. Like, you know, I'm going to prison anyway. And for me, it just wasn't an option. And I ended up only getting sentenced to 3 years in prison. They reduced my crime due to my recovery. And I ended up only serving 2 years in prison because of some work I had done while I was in there. And plus I went back into court, and she reduced one of my other charges to just serve 1 day in prison for it. So I ended up serving exactly 2 years. I was in there from March 8th, 2011 until March 8th, 2013. And
that's a long time, even though it was reduced. be in prison. Yeah. And
It
that was in Maine.
It was in Framingham, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And it was probably one of the most beautiful experiences of my life.
So this is crazy. Let's just say it.
Yeah.
That's free. I know because you shared this with me, but 2 years in prison, one of the most beautiful experiences of your life. So say more about that, please.
So when I first got in, I was really angry and I was like, I don't belong here. I'm doing the right thing. Like, I don't belong here. And eventually I realized that I was just resisting reality. And when I resist reality, I create my own suffering. And finally, I just kind of like let go. And I was like, you know what? Like, I'm here and I can't think my way out of it and I can't buy my way out of it. So I'm just going to do what God would want me to do. And, I started teaching yoga to the inmates, and I took some women through the 12 steps, and I worked with the mental health facilitator to do some groups for the women, and I became useful. And I was free. They counted me 6 times a day. They told me when to eat, how to eat, what to eat, but I was mentally free, and I was so connected to myself and to God and to helping others that it was beautiful. And, the spiritual growth I was able to have there and literally be free, even though my physical freedom was not there, my mental freedom was 100%, and it was beautiful.
So that's pretty mind-blowing, really. There you are locked up and you find real freedom. And I think what you're talking about is your soul was free.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that really helped the other women that you came in contact with. And so in a way you found your reason for being? I mean, that's
Purpose.
Yeah,
I'm a very purpose-driven person. So when I'm lacking purpose, I sometimes fall short, but
so how would you say what was your purpose then? What would you say it was when you were there?
I think it was to give hope to others. And I think today that's still my purpose. I'd like to say that I stayed on that spiritual path through today, but I did not. I started I was released from prison, and life started happening, and I forgot what was really important, which is like having purpose and staying connected and being useful. And, life happened, and I got a job, and I had a beautiful baby, and I got married, and my life became a little bit difficult and overwhelming, and it was just everyday things. And so I was so full of fear to let people know that I was struggling with my marriage or struggling being a mother. And I didn't ask for help. And in that, I ended up getting sick again, and I ended up picking up after 8 years of sobriety. And it was really ugly. People always say when you relapse in the steps that it's awful. And it is true. It is a true statement. It's awful because especially when you've experienced the joys and the freedoms of recovery, and then you're back in that place of feeling trapped again. It was really ugly. And, you get into that. For me, it's like fear paralyzes me. And it's like, as much as I want to do something with it, sometimes I just can't, or I don't know what to do with it. And then I'm just stuck. And when I'm connected to my recovery and I'm connected to God and to others, I have faith and trust that walking through the fear, I'll be okay.
Right.
But for me as a person, with an addiction, if I'm not connected, and if my recovery is not first, and I'm not, constantly taking care of my recovery, my sick thinking will come back. Those negative thoughts will return and tell me that I can't do this. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy.
And everybody listening to this, I mean, we all have those thoughts, and you with your particular physiology, they really were loud, right? And maybe it isn't the same for I know it's not the same for everybody, but we all have them. And on the heroine's journey, we call them threshold guardians, or someone might call them the critic in our head or the saboteurs in our head. And I've worked with so many women, and I ask them about those thoughts because everybody has them. And they very much say that they're kind of similar to other women. I mean, it's like we all have that same, you're not worthy. Who do you think you are? You'll never make it happen. All that stuff, those threshold guardians say in everybody's heads. And I would suspect that part of your fear too is just the shame of having to shame is so gets in our way. Brene Brown is so good at helping us work through that. But yeah, boy, so you had like a double whammy, right?
I did have a double whammy. And, for me, when I speak to other women, because I feel like I'm an extremist, like, I need to have 10 years of, prison time hanging over my head to make a change. But those internal feelings of shame and, doubt and insecurity and fear, those are the things we can all identify, whether we're in recovery or we're not in recovery. Not everybody needs to be in recovery. We all share those same feelings, and just knowing that there is a way through them together is just a remarkable thing. So when I share, with other women, I try to really, although I do share my extremes, because if I can go through those things and be sober and be in recovery, then what can't I go through? And, and I did show you that, as I stepped away from my recovery, I got back into my disease. And so it's just show in that shame, like you said, the shame, it's like a heavy blanket and you just can't move from it. And again, it was fear, I had disappointed people that had seen me in recovery for so long. And, but again, like those feelings are something we can all identify with.
All of us, really. And maybe lesser, not the extreme always, but absolutely. And so how do you then get the tools back to work with your disease? And what did you do what were those steps you took?
So, after I had relapsed, I wanted to get back into my recovery and into the steps. But again, like fear really held me back. And I had taken little steps to try. And then I kind of just didn't try hard enough because I wasn't asking for help again, due to fear. I thought I could do it by myself. And ultimately, at that point, I was a single mom. My daughter's father was not in the picture, and my family live far away. My brother lives in Dallas, and my dad spends most of his time in Australia. And so it was me and my daughter. And so my fear also is like, what happens to my daughter? So I go to detox again, and that kept me using for much longer than I had hoped or would want, But what happened was my mother wasn't around when I was little. She's an alcoholic. She's still active. And I was looking at my daughter's life and I was like, I'm going to repeat my life for my daughter. And I do not want that. I do not want her to have the childhood that I had with an absent mother. And so finally, my dad came home in July. I had lost my job due to my addiction. My dad came home in July of 2019. And I just said, Dad, I need help. And he's like, what do you need? And I said, I need you to take my daughter and I have to go back to detox. And he said, okay, let me help. And, and at that point, so I go to the detox and I come home after about 12 days. I was still very, very sick. I was not ready to have my daughter back. My family also was really mad at me because they had found out some stuff I had done during my using. I created a lot of harm and a lot of chaos to a lot of people. And, so, and at that point, my willingness to do anything and everything I had to do to stay sober was very extreme. And I was willing to do, and, and I just came home. Like this time around, I didn't have like a 12-step retreat to go to in the beautiful mountains of New Hampshire. I came home to my condo and it was just me. And I'm like, okay, like, what am I going to do? And, I got my sponsor, who's my sponsor today, and started going through the steps again. And then I went to an IOP program, which is an intensive outpatient program here in Portland. And I went there for as long as they would let me. And I was looking for work and they ended up letting me go. It's an 8-week program. I went for 17 weeks because it was a safe place. And I was just fueling my soul with recovery and being useful and listening and learning. And because like the thing for me is like, the more I know, the less I know. And if I can just feed my soul with spiritual literature and people and experience, then that is just a beautiful thing for me. And so I was able to do that. And, it was really hard again, because I was at home and, I had also gotten into some trouble again from when I was active. And so, and I was like losing my condo because I couldn't pay my bills, but I just had this trust that like everything was going to be okay. And, that fear of the unknown is so great. But for me, like the willingness to do the right thing, to stay sober, to have, my recovery be number one, to have my daughter back was just really at the center of everything. And so I just kept trudging along.
One step at a time. Yeah.
One step
So
at a time.
it's just so, well, yeah. So everyone can hear why this is such a remarkable story, and just your courage in sharing it, right? I mean, it's really a gift that you would share your experience with us, because other people are going to get hope from what you're telling us. And, just the themes, asking for help was hard for you. But it ended up being a lifeline once you finally did, and I have a hard time asking for help, right? It's a common human failing. And the other thing I noted, the resisting reality is what causes you to suffer. And I think we both talked about Byron Katie, who's a well-known spiritual leader who her whole practice is based on don't resist reality, and is it really true? And she has a whole process for that. So it does cause suffering. And so the other thing about being free, you're free of the burden of that shame and the burden of that having to fill that hole with stuff that isn't good for you. And is the hole filled?
The hole is filled today because it's filled with my spirituality. And, like I mentioned, for me, the 12 steps is a pathway to God. And, for me, God doesn't necessarily have to align with any religion. For me, God is like this big, giant, warm hug that lets me know that no matter what, everything's going to be okay. And that no substance, no amount of shoes or clothing or new cars will make anything better, but God will always be there and make sure everything's okay and will provide for me. In the past 2 years, since I've been back in recovery, like I said, I almost lost my condo. I did not. I still have it because I just kept doing the right thing. And, I did not get in a ton of trouble for the, chaos I created. I, have to pay some restitution, and I'm very grateful for that. My daughter has me with her. My daughter's father passed away from a drug overdose last summer, right before her birthday. And, we're okay. And I was able to be there for her and support her and love her. And, so much has happened. I've had a great boyfriend, and we broke up recently, and that's been tremendous heartache for me, but like everything's okay. And I just trust that there's this greater purpose and picture. And, like the journey is going to continue, and I'm going to continue to have callings, and, they're going to be different though. And it's exciting.
Right. I think, and you've talked to me about how you love leading groups in recovery and talking about resilience, which is how you met David, I think. And so, helping other people who are struggling, what a calling that is, what a purpose that is. And so as I think about who might be listening to this, that there might be somebody that's, wow, resonating, maybe not with the going to prison and the 10 police officers outside your door, but saying, I think I have a problem, and maybe they're thinking, maybe it's time to do something. I mean, what would you tell them? What would be a step if they're thinking, I need to do something about however they're abusing?
I mean, for me, it's kind of like, if I think about like a newcomer, and they're like questioning, is this for me? Can I identify? My thing is like, if you're feeling hopeless or you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, then give the 12 steps a shot, get connected, because what do you have to lose? For me, it's like, if you come in, and like, to be perfectly honest, even people who aren't addicts could benefit from doing the 12 steps. Like, it's a beautiful process. And
I can say, absolutely, it is a beautiful process.
It's beautiful. And it just really gives you so much from it. And for me, it's like, give it a shot. What do you have to lose? Because if you start going through the process and you're not happy with it, drinking and drugging still going to be there. It's not going anywhere. So if like you're feeling hopeless, or you're feeling like you have an empty hole in your soul and you don't know what to do with it, then give it a shot, and there's plenty of 12-step programs for lots of different issues. And the idea behind them all is the same regardless. I mean, for me, it's like, I'm powerless over alcohol or drugs, but like, literally, I could take that word alcohol and drugs out and replace it with anything. I could replace it with emotions. Like today, what's important for me is my emotional sobriety. And so I replace the word alcohol, because for me, once the drugs and alcohol are gone, like that's it. I don't struggle with using today, but I do struggle with keeping my emotions in check. So it's like, what does that look like? So I'm powerless over my emotions. And how do I make it so my emotions are somewhat even keeled today? And that's where like the trust in God comes, and faith that everything's going to be okay.
So do you still have those negative thoughts in your head? Do they still come in?
Of course they do. And then, so the other thing that I keep literally at the forefront is like, every day is a new day, and I'm a human being with human thinking, and I'm going to make mistakes, but it's like, am I going to learn from them? And if I'm making the same mistakes, well, that's a little problematic, but like, that's where we grow. I've always been so afraid of failing, but like today, I don't really look at failing as a negative thing. It's an opportunity for growth. And that's what my recovery has taught me, that like, it used to be just so like, I'd be like, oh no, what if I do this and I don't do good at it? So I would almost like do poorly at it anyway, because then I had an excuse why I didn't do great. And so it's like, you perpetuate your fear by creating your fear, almost like just, and so for me, it's like, I'm a human being, and I'm going to, every day I just try to do my best. And some days my best isn't as good as the other days. And, I fall short in parenting. It's really hard being a completely single parent with no family around.
You're not a perfect parent, Colleen?
No,
you're not perfect? Wow.
I'm not a perfect employee. I'm not a perfect daughter. I'm not a perfect person, but I am perfectly imperfect.
Yes, definitely. And that's the truth. That's a real truth. Yeah. And so when fear comes, because you said that's the thing that has always been hard for you, what do you have a tip or a way that you deal with that now? I mean, you'll probably tell me to stick with your program, right? But how do you deal with fear? Because it keeps coming up for all of us.
For me, how I deal with my fear is I look at it and then I ask myself why I have the fear. And ultimately I come to a root fear. And then I look at my self-reliance, like how do I manage, control, or manage control to try to avoid walking through that fear. And then I look how my self-reliance fails me. And my self-reliance usually just perpetuates the fear. And then I look at, okay, well, if I'm God reliant, what does that look like? Right. And if I'm God reliant, it looks like no matter what happens when I walk through that fear, I'm going to be okay.
Everything is good. Yeah.
And if I don't walk through it, I'm the one missing out. Like, I'm holding myself back from God only knows what by not walking through that fear.
Right. And I think our brain gets in there and our brain thinks it knows what's going to happen. And, how could we possibly know what God or the universe, whatever you want to call it, has as a possibility for us? We can't know, but we're so sure. Oh, if I do that, I'll never make enough money if I get that job or leave this job, or we're just so sure and we don't know. Yeah.
We do not know. Wow. And also today, I don't carry shame, and it's only because of the process of the steps. And, my self-confidence is back, my self-esteem is back. And, it's because I'm a person who lives by a set of principles today. And so I make sure that my actions align with those principles. And that makes me have that confidence in the ability to walk through fear and just be my authentic self, which I'd always been fearful of being, 10, 11, 12 years ago.
Right. Being who you are. And so, Colleen, and gifting us with who you are and with your story. It's just, a story of such courage and bravery and hope. I guess you're right. I mean, if you give people hope, that's your purpose. How can anybody listen to this with whatever they're thinking about they're ashamed of or the mistakes they've made and not forgive themselves and know that? And I guess that's, I would say, because I talk about spirit and God and the universe, and I say you only need like a teeny bit of belief, and that will help you. It really will help you. And I remember, what's his name? Dyer, who's the famous author, Dyer.
Oh yeah.
You know who I mean.
I know who you mean.
He had this great story, or just he would say, it's like going into a room and not turning the light switch on, not reaching out to God, or being on a trolley and in San Francisco and you're being all, backwards and forwards. All you have to do is hang on to the strap, which could be like hanging on to the divine, and you're better off. So it's another way of asking for help for sure. And yeah, so your story is so helpful in so many ways. I mean, dealing with all of these themes that we've been talking about. So, well, we have to bring our talk to a close, but I want to, I don't know, somebody out there listening, what do you want to make sure? What's the message you want to make sure they got from listening to you?
I would say the most important thing, and this is for if you're in recovery or not in recovery, that you're not alone. We are not alone. And like all that negative self-talk, or even like maybe mistakes we've made or shameful acts, or there is someone else in this world who has done what you have done, if not worse. So we are not alone. We are human beings, and we're here to lift each other up and help one another. And there is hope, and there is just life is going to happen no matter what. And it's like, how can I be the best version of myself today, and live life on life's terms?
And I know that, like me, you have a belief in that we have energy, that our positive way of being is reflected outward. And so I know that wherever you go, you're making people feel good even before you open your mouth. And it's just a beautiful thing. And your journey, again, you said being in jail was the most extraordinary, wonderful experience of my life. Well, I guess I'm glad for you that you had it. And that is, on the heroine's journey, we evolve. I mean, that's, to me, I think that's our job as humans, is to evolve to our highest potential. And we do it by answering those calls and growing and growing. And that's, boy, you just, through the pain, through everything, you have just kept growing, and it's remarkable.
And it's not over.
No, it's not.
But that's okay.
And I asked you about a book, and you said, well, it's been in my head. So yeah, something about you're not your mess or something.
So I'm reading a book called Make Your Mess Your Memoir.
There you
And
go.
so I had written a memoir in prison, but it got lost. So I'm considering writing a new one, because clearly that was not the version the universe wanted out there. So I'm going to get on it. And then in my crazy mind, I'm like, HBO will make a series of it, and it'll be like Sex in the City meets Orange is the New Black.
Okay. And who's going to play you, I wonder?
I don't know.
Well, listen, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I have a feeling we're going to have to, maybe in a year or less, get back with you and see how things are going.
Oh, I would love that.
Oh, it would be wonderful. And I just encourage everybody to keep watching, keep listening to this podcast. I hope that you also have a chance to follow me on Instagram, and I have SusannaLiller.com has other information for you, and you'll know when Colleen's coming back. And I have a group, the Real Life Heroines Network, which Colleen is now a part of, where we're collecting heroines, women who have answered their call. So join us there. We'd love to see you. And again, Colleen, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Take care. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the podcast for Real Life Heroines with Susanna Liller. We're so glad you've joined us and would love to connect with you outside of the show. To find more about Susanna and how she can assist you in your heroine story, go to SusannaLiller.com/blog or find us on social media and YouTube by searching Susanna Liller. You can also email us directly at Susanna@SusannaLiller.com. We'd love to hear from you. To be encouraged and inspired outside of the show and blog, check out You Are a Heroine, a retelling of the hero's journey written by your host and coach, Susanna, available on Amazon. Until the next time, be well, heroine.